the Assistant Dean for Global Youth Advancement in the Office of International Studies and Programs at MSU. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the inaugural Global Voices webinar series on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We will be hosting these webinars quarterly, and each session will focus on a cluster of related SDGs. Today's discussion will explore the theme of food systems in a COVID-19 era, and will highlight the work our panelists are doing to support SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 2, zero hunger, and SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. We are now entering the last decade of the SDGs, and many regions of the world face a real challenge of meeting the set targets by 2030. Countries that were already struggling have been set even further behind by the COVID crisis. This series aims to help the MSU community and our partners and our young innovators around the world to achieve three objectives. One, to unpack some of the challenges that exist in each sector targeted by the SDGs in an attempt to identify the root of the problem. Two, to showcase best practices and share lessons learned from the research and development initiatives that our speakers are engaged in. And three, to create opportunities for our faculty, industry experts, and young innovators to connect, communicate, and collaborate on new research and development projects. So now it's time to hear from our speakers. Unfortunately, Vanessa Garcia Polanco, who was supposed to moderate the session today, is dealing with an unexpected health challenge. In Vanessa's absence, my colleague, Dr. Kwame Yeboah, has graciously accepted to step in as the moderator. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Yeboah, who is the Senior Program Officer for the Global Youth Advancement Network and an accomplished researcher and development expert in his own right. Kwame, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chinwe, for the warm welcome and introduction to the Global Voices series. It is my pleasure to serve as a moderator for this inaugural session, which is going to focus on SDG 1, 2, and 11, which together seeks to end hunger and poverty of all forms and promote sustainable cities and communities. We all know that despite improvement over the past few decades, the world still faces poverty and a hunger crisis. And just to cite a few statistics, we have more than 700 million people live in extreme poverty, and nearly 690 million people are undernourished. And a recent assessment indicates that the world is off track to achieve zero hunger and end poverty of all forms by 2030. And at this current pace that the world is going, the Global Hunger Index estimates that about 37 countries will fail to reach even low levels of hunger by 2030. And even before COVID, the share of global population that is living in extreme poverty was projected to reach 6% by 2030. And that is no zero hunger. And COVID, on the other hand, is expected to push 71 million people into poverty, extreme poverty by 2020. And there's also going to further increase the number of people in chronic hunger by 80 to 130 million people. In fact, even right here in the United States, we have seen rising food insecurity as evidenced by the record number of people who are patronizing food banks over the past 7 months. These are certainly very, staggering statistics, and we all need to redouble our efforts if the goals of ending hunger and poverty by 2030 could become a reality. And we know that the food system is the main mechanism by which we are able to address the food insecurity challenges. And much of the poor in the world depend on agriculture for their livelihood. And the food system, which consists of all the activities, right from the farm to the table of the consumer, is that mechanism that we can use to address food security. But these also face a lot of challenges within that food system, and some of those challenges ranges from conflicts, from climate change, from pest and disease like the fall armyworm and the desert locust outbreak, which we witnessed in parts of Africa over the past 3 years, and now with COVID. As a pioneer land-grant university, MSU is at the forefront of addressing challenges associated with the agri-food system. So it is quite befitting that today's inaugural discussion focuses on this food system. And we have assembled a distinguished panel of experts and thought leaders to help us think through the nature of the challenges that is facing the agri-food system, the current efforts to address these challenges, and also offer some insight in what you and I, as individuals or institutions, can do to contribute to achieve these global goals. So before I bring in our August panelists, I just want to just provide some housekeeping notes. In the interest of time, we will not be reading the bios of the panelists. Rather, we will be inserting their bios in the chat, which you can access at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also use that chat function to share your thoughts and make a contribution to the discussion. We are going to start out with a few questions which our panelists will respond to, after which I'm going to open it up to the audience to also ask questions. Again, you can also use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions, and we will make sure that the audience attend to those questions. So on that note, I would want to launch straight into our discussion for today. And we are going to begin by exploring some of those challenges. And I would want to start with Professor David Shelley, who is a professor and the co-director of the Food Security Group in the Department of Agriculture, Food, and in the Department of Food, Agriculture, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. So, Dave, you have been at the, you and the Food Security Group have been at the forefront of addressing some of the issues associated with agriculture and food system transformations around the world. In light of the COVID, what are some of those pressing challenges that you see COVID presenting to the various segments of the agri-food system? We know we have the upstream, we have the downstream, and we have the midstream. So what are some of those pressing challenges that COVID presents to the various segments of the agri-food system?
Great. Okay, thank you, Kwame. Thank you very much. So yes, we really do have a great group in AFRI, in our food security group in AFRI, working on these issues, and it's really, it is actually an honor to be able to help lead that and make its work known. So I'm going to kind of quickly make 5 points here because I know neither of us should speak for too long. My first point is that the global food system has actually done remarkably well as a food system in responding to this crisis. Some of the biggest fears about what might happen have not come to fruition. In my comments on the second question, I'll get to a little bit of why that is. Second thing I'll say is echoing what you just said, Kwame, which is that the drop in income, there's been a big drop in income in developed countries, developing countries all over the world. And that's going to have an enormous effect on food security because that drop in income is likely not evenly distributed. The poor and vulnerable are heavily affected. So for example, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, projects that more than 5% per capita negative income growth in Africa this year, and again, negative income per capita income growth next year, if the pandemic is well controlled. So this means at least 10 years of lost growth in Africa with big impact. So that's a huge issue. Third point is that simply operating safely, especially in crowded retail settings of developed countries, is a very, very big challenge. Can't go into any detail on that with the time that we have. Fourth issue is that dealing with government measures meant to control the virus, stricter border checks, temporary shutdown of markets, sometimes control on public transport and so forth, is a major problem locally for food markets. And then finally, I think one of the biggest long-term challenges is the issue of how to deal with the survival of the largest, as I'm calling it for now anyway. This relates to the consolidation in the midstream and downstream, especially, Kwame, in the middle of the supply chain and down at the retail level of the supply chain, this consolidation that has already been going on quite rapidly in middle and upper middle and high income countries, has very likely been greatly sped up, and then is likely happening also in developing countries. So this is a big problem for employment in these developing countries, because the midstream and downstream processing, marketing, retailing, et cetera, transport provides lots of employment for people in micro, small, and medium enterprises. And how competitive are they going to be able to be? I would say that in closing on this topic anyway, that food service may be especially affected. We all know what's happening with restaurants in the US and the likely shakeout and inability of many of the smaller ones to stay in business. We also see from survey results just coming in from Kenya and Zambia that the biggest impact in terms of consumer food purchases has been on prepared foods, okay? And it's because their fear of COVID in that setting is higher than in any other setting where they obtain their food. So again, this comes down to businesses and livelihoods for people that are being threatened. So thanks. I think I'm going to quit for now because we have a lot of panelists. Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you very much, Dave, for those insights. Yeah. So I'm going to turn to you, Savannah, to share some insight with us. And Dave talked about things happening in the downstream and in the midstream. And I know that you also work with farmers and helping them to access market. So my key question is, in what ways has COVID impacted farmers, and how are farmers responding to these impacts? And just to share with the audience that Savannah is a graduate of MSU, the Department of Community Sustainability, and currently has a grant that she's working on to develop innovative solutions to family farming and food security in Paraguay. So Savannah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to speak about my experiences in my home country. As they have mentioned, I'm from Paraguay. So in Paraguay, the opportunities to provide food and services have been reduced due to very strict lockdown policies. While the isolation policies are very necessary, they have also generated an impact on the supply and the demand of food and other products, which has generated also that food many times was scarce and other times very expensive. And on this same point, therefore, the main impact is that the pandemic has affected the commercialization and distribution of products because traditional avenues like farmers market and fairs were not available. However, farmers have demonstrated to be highly innovative and resilient. They have developed strategies to cope with this difficult time, as for example, they have developed strategies to delivery and pickup systems, and they have also started offering their products via social media networks that has been very successful and very important for them, and that has helped them to keep receiving incomes and providing food, which is very important.
Thank you very much, Savannah. It's great to hear that farmers are adopting innovative approaches using social media to make sure that they are able to continue marketing their products. I would want to turn to Emily. Emily Shuttle is a senior manager at United Way, and she oversees their emergency coronavirus response fund. And Emily, you have been instrumental in providing community members. Your work has been quite instrumental in providing a response to the negative effects that community members are facing. Can you just tell us about how your role so just share, can you just tell us how you, in your role, pivoting to resources and restructuring to the target food security?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. So from its public launch on March 16th through June 8th, the Coronavirus Response Fund provided over $3 million to 130 agencies, reaching 400,000 individuals. During this time, the need for essentials like food and housing increased dramatically in March and April, causing call volume in our 211 Resource and Referral Center to rise 46%, and it largely fell to nonprofits to carry the burden of that increased need. So as all of you know, our world changed early mid-March with the onset of the pandemic. And in hindsight, I have to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing and was just hoping that what we were putting together was going to work and benefit Kent County here in Michigan. Our CEO, Michelle Van Dyke, as well as our resource development team, were able to raise funds very, very quickly from local philanthropists and companies to address the early flood of need that was coming into our county. It was before any federal or state funding was ready to flow, and we were hearing about significant needs related to the shutdown, particularly around food security. My boss was actually out at the time, ill, and so we had a very small team that had to come up with a process to move a significant amount of money rapidly into vulnerable and underserved communities in Kent County. So what we did was remove barriers and actually trusted organizations to do the right thing. It doesn't sound like a novel idea, but in the world of philanthropy, there is a lot of oversight and a lot of barriers. So we intended to pull a lot of that out of the process.
Can you speak a little bit, shed a little bit more light on the barriers that you faced?
What was that?
I said, can you please share a little bit light on the barriers that you faced? You said you had to remove some of those barriers. What were some of those barriers?
So some of the barriers that we had to remove included some of the typical oversight and eligibility requirements that made it difficult for small, new, or grassroots organizations. So we didn't require the tracking of outcome achievement. Outcome achievement takes often a very long time to prove. So we removed thresholds for annual revenue, audits, years of operation. We didn't require a volunteer review to deliberate over decisions. Instead, we had staff from our organization as well as another local organization called the Essential Needs Task Force. So we reviewed those applications and we were able to make decisions within 24 hours. So basically, if organizations had a 501c3 tax status, cited needs that were related to food security, housing, some of those basic needs, and were located in Kent County, they received funding. And we were able to deposit those funds within 2 business days using electronic fund transfers. So it was an open process that was available until funds ran out. but the more funders saw the results, the more funds were rolling in. So over just about 9 million went to organizations that were providing food security services only. And then an additional million went to those that were providing a combination of services, which also included some food security and hunger relief services. Those food security services included food for pantries, seeds and plants for home gardens, community supported agriculture for low income families, home delivered meal services, etc.
Thank you very much, Emily. That's a tremendous piece of work that you are doing. I will certainly come back to you to learn a little bit more. I would now want to turn my attention to Elijah Amon, who is joining us also from Ghana. Elijah is a chef and the founder of Food for All Africa, which is a non-profit organization that is inspired by the FAO's campaign against food waste. So, Elijah, your Food for All specializes in anti-food waste and hunger reduction, especially among the vulnerable groups. So can you just tell us how the pandemic has intensified the food needs of the populations you serve and how you are meeting those needs?
All right. Thank you very much, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, so before the COVID pandemic, Food for All Africa has since 2015 been advocating for food banking in most sub-Saharan African countries. It's quite shocking that on the whole of the continent, we have just 2 food banks. That is in Egypt, somewhere started in 2006, and then in South Africa, started in 2009. Food for All started West Africa's first and largest food bank in Ghana. And because of inefficiencies within our food supply chain, as well as no regulation centered around food donation, initially it was quite difficult for us. But as a community organization that started off with advocacy, 2016, we had the opportunity of hosting the first ever Food for All Ghana conference, where we advocated for a national food donors encouragement policy, which the government by then saw then because there was in Ghana, so on us in recovering food from some entities or stakeholders within the food supply chain to support vulnerable people, mostly children. But when I'm in Ghana, that was some March. We immediately launched the Food for All 19 Community Emergency Program. And we had a lot of support from individuals. We were going on lockdown. We were already providing food boxes to vulnerable families within communities, and we were also providing hot meals to homeless. Down, the government intervention was quite low in terms of providing support for vulnerable people, especially in the area of nutrition. And so a lot of the media created that commitment. We even had that of Ghana trying as possible to liaise with us to get to see how we are able to recover food from the supply chain point to support vulnerable people.
Elijah, it appears that your connection is a little bit poor. So I think we lost Elijah a little bit. We'll just wait for him to come back in. But we'll just continue with the discussion whilst Elijah addresses his connection issue and join us. So Dave, I will get to you, Dave, again. You did touch on some of the challenges that the the food system has been facing, and I know that you've done some work that has looked at food system in crisis and how those have impacted food security in places like in Latin America. What lessons can the global food system learn from those previous situations that we can apply and adapt to these to the challenges that coronavirus is posing? Are there any kind of policy strategies that you will recommend?
Sure. Okay, thank you, Kwame. Thank you very much. So just to clarify, I did start my career in Latin America, that's true, and I maintain a great interest there, but my work, most of my work is actually in East and Southern Africa now, a little bit in West Africa and a little bit in Asia, but primarily East and Southern Africa. So a few things here. First of all is the absolute need to keep the food moving, and this means private markets largely, right? Very, very, very dominantly private markets. So yes, you need to get safety nets in place, but you need to realize that these will cover only a very small share of the food needs, even of the whole mass of the vulnerable population. So they're important, they're crucial for some people, but overall it's a matter of keeping the private food markets working, you know, in part so that the NGOs that are doing crucial work can focus on that crucial work and not have to expand into things that perhaps they're not really equipped to do. Second thing, yes, provide income replacement to prop up demand. The lack of demand is now the main problem for many operators in the food system because of declining incomes. And of course, there's a big problem in developing countries of what we call the fiscal space, the ability to borrow money to provide these cash safety nets to people. And this is where there needs to be a lot more collaboration. There's a lot going on. It's hard to quantify it all because there's so many different things, but there needs to be a lot more revenue flow or financial aid flow into these countries to be able to finance the kind of income replacement that's needed. So that's the second thing, is income replacement. Third, I will note that the global community did much better this time in avoiding counterproductive measures such as border closures compared to 2008. 2008, there were many border closures that led to much greater food security problems and supply problems than there needed to be on the basis of the crisis per se, right? This time, there have been many fewer border closures, and it means that only very small portions of countries' food supplies, certainly in Africa, have actually been affected by these border closures. So that's a big deal, and has been, I would say, a major success. A fourth point, I'll refer to this rise of digital platforms, and I guess this echoes some of what Silvana is doing in Paraguay, where what we find, and it's also related to this consolidation, right? So digitalization has contributed to the rises of the Amazons of the world and the others, and the taking over of market share. But at the same time, we see evidence, Tom Reardon, my colleague, is doing work on this, of these larger firms in developing countries helping smaller firms function online to be able to access their platforms to be able to be suppliers. And perhaps that's what Silvana is helping firms do, I'm not sure. But this is a major area where if you can provide better internet access, kind of technical training, perhaps facilitate that technical training by the larger companies who might be able to make these small and medium enterprises and even perhaps micro enterprises business partners with them. That can be really, really helpful. And then finally, I would just say that, you know, informal food markets predominate in the developing world. They tend to have major regulatory and infrastructural problems. And so there's a saying, don't let any good crisis go to waste, right? Well, let's use this COVID crisis to invest in better infrastructure and better management structures for these informal markets. I'm going to have to leave after this. So I wanted to volunteer then an answer to the third question, which has to do with what can we do personally? And what I'd like to focus on here, just 1 minute, is food loss and waste. That's become a big topic globally, right? Well, in the US and developed countries, the problem is waste. It's not so much food loss, it's food waste. And that waste happens either in our homes, the food has gone through the whole supply chain and reached our homes, it's in our refrigerator and we don't use it and we throw it away, right? Or it happens at retail when supermarkets get rid of fresh produce that they think consumers aren't going to buy because they have small blemishes and so forth, right? So much of it is waste at the retail and consumer end of the system. So if each of us could change our shopping habits and change our preferences and buy that apple that has a little mark on it, buy that tomato that doesn't look quite perfect, right? You know, millions of people doing this and changing their attitudes can have a big impact on waste in the US and other developed countries, high-income countries. So as usual, I could talk for a lot longer, but I'm going to stop. Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you very much, Dave, for those insights. I know you have to leave at the top of the hour, but I just want to quickly ask you to shed a little bit more light on how best to integrate these small farmers, these small scale enterprises who are adversely affected. You talked about how some of these big companies are trying to find ways to get them. Are there other innovative approaches that you have seen that is helping to integrate these small holders who are operating along the food system?
Yeah, our small operators in the midstream and the downstream. Yeah, so I think the first thing we have to do is simply understand to what extent are the larger firms that can really run these large digital platforms, to what extent are they reaching out to SMEs already, right? We need to understand that. To the extent that they are, we need to put in place, you know, procedures to help them do that more, right? Perhaps defray some of the costs, perhaps cover some of the costs of technical training, you know, perhaps help some of the NGOs focus on building internet savvy, internet connectivity, and so forth for these firms, but do it very much in a market setting based on where the demand is coming from and where these firms can fit into it. So I personally, honestly, I can't point to specific programs that currently exist to do that. I think Silvana and others are in a better place to do that. But it's the first thing I would simply emphasize is that we need to understand what's already happening and we need to build off of that and then cover gaps.
Thank you very much, Dave. That tees it up very well for you, Savannah. And I'm curious to learn about, are there any practices or opportunities that are available to support these farmers to adapt to the changes and the anxiety that they are currently experiencing?
So actually the pandemic exposed that, in fact, there are very few strategies to support farmers in times of crisis, at least in my home country, in Paraguay. However, as I highlighted earlier, farmers have shown to be very innovative and resilient, and they found themselves their ways to commercialize in a digitalized world in the 21st century. And it was also important this in the NGO, civil society. So it was more like a bottom-up strategies that were developing for the very same farmers, people whose livelihoods depends on that, creating social media network, marketing strategies to connect farmers to buyers, or from the from the same farmers to try to innovate and create their delivery systems. So what I think is that the government should learn from them and to include in the future in their policies more strategies focus more on transitioning from the traditional ways of commercialization to new avenues, like introducing and promoting the use of e-commerce platforms, social media networks, investing more on teaching people and farmers how to access to technology that will help a lot.
Okay, thank, thank you very much. Are you seeing any trends of government reaching out to these farmers? And in your opinion, um, is there
Yes,
something that could be done to help deepen that engagement between government and
yes.
these?
I think this pandemic, no one was expecting this, so people didn't know how to react. But I think people is coping fast changes. And for instance, now they have these pickup systems where the government provide like a very like a place where farmers can take their products and then people go and pick up from them. So that helps with farmers who don't have buildings, installations to store their products. So they have started that kind of initiatives that have been helping a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Savannah. Before I move on to our next panelist, I also want to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to through using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be happy to share them with our panelists to answer them for you. I would want to turn to Elijah again, and then I know Dave talked about the need to reduce food waste, and I also know that your work has focused on trying to reduce food waste, especially during this pandemic. Can you just tell us how you envision communities and organizations reducing food waste and meeting food security goals?
Yes, so basically, food waste is a critical time bomb issue when you look at the food supply chain in most developing countries. The mistake we've done over the years is to focus more on food loss rather than within the distribution, rather than food waste as well. And as a developing country, rapidly there is more food going waste along the supply chain. And so for us as a community organization that has focused on creating a kind of environment through advocacy to ensure food donation, recovering of food that would have gone wasted to be donated to vulnerable in society. The pandemic also created a platform for people to see that the issue we've been talking about, the issue of food waste, really exists within the supply chain, especially within the hotel hospitality sector. All of a sudden, we had hospitality companies shutting down and letting their staffs going home with loads of products that they have stockpiled in their storerooms, in their freezers. And there's no way they are going to have to spend extra money to pay for electricity and other costs when they are not in operation. So the only avenue they had to tend to was initiatives like ours during the lockdown. So we had to recover from hospitality companies and provide redistributed to vulnerable people. And then that created that platform for people to now see the importance of food banking in Ghana, and also for communities to see that indeed food is going waste along the supply chain.
Well, thank you, Elijah. It is really interesting to see some of these dynamics play out as a result of COVID. I would come back to you to learn a little bit more, but we'll now want to move to Emily, who has had some experience working to establish the Kent County food policy. And I understand the Food Policy Council provide a great avenue to be more active in governance and also to shape the local food system. And we talked about the role of government when in addressing some of these issues. What are some lessons learned? Are there things that you found to be very effective on how to engage with government, for lack of a better way, to nudge them to do things that could promote food security?
So as a formation team, we're very early in the process, and it feels like it's taking a lot of time, but it's important to take time to get it right. So what I've learned is that what membership looks like is imperative. So although it will take multiple sectors and stakeholders to create local policy, membership needs to be driven by communities that are most affected by local policies and the local system, as well as some of the other systems. In order to do that, as a formation team, we need to be connected to those communities. Just like anything else, it comes down to trust. So we're in the process of building those relationships in communities that are being most affected by these local policies. The other thing that I've learned is how important an organization like this could be in times of crisis. I imagine if we were a little further along, a Kent County Food Policy Council could help remind the public about the importance of keeping equity, nutrition, and sustainability as part of the solution in times of crisis. COVID-19 amplified inequities in our community that have already existed for a really long time. In times of stress, experiencing poverty feel the weight most heavily. But I think a council like this and those that work with local policy could help remind the general public that it's possible and it's necessary to address a crisis of food insecurity by working with local growers, staying focused on providing nutritious food, and to do it in equitable and empowering ways. I think during times of crisis, there is an initial panic to get food moving quickly, but sometimes losing sight of the type of food and how we're doing it.
Thank you for the insights of Emily, the need to balance quantity with quality, that is addressing the nutrition aspect of food. Again, we would want to encourage you, if you have any questions for our panelists, we want to open it up now. If you have any questions for our panelists, you can use the chat function to send in your questions, and I'll be happy to read it to our panelists to respond to them. Okay. So while we wait for individuals to send in some thoughts, we know that when it comes to achieving the collective sustainable development goal, it takes individual and it takes efforts of organizations to be able to do that. And as Chinwe said at the beginning, that we're trying to sensitize everyone to determine what they can do individually, learn about these, and also to determine what they can do individually to help contribute to it. So given the realities that we find ourselves in, what are some of the things that you recommend for us as individuals or institutions to do that can help safeguard food security during these times of crisis? I would can start with Savannah.
Yes, and thank you. So what strikes me the most, what I think is we should reflect or address the question of how we want a democracy or a democratic food system looks like even in times of crisis and pandemic. Because in my home country, during the quarantine and lockdown policies, freedom of movement and access and rights to work were compromised. There were not, at any time, there were not public consultation by the government, and many people's livelihoods were heavily impacted by this pandemic. So I think we should, I don't have the right answer for how a democracy can look like in these very, very difficult times. But I think we should reflect and think about that. And also I think that advocating for policies such as relief funds and for policies that promote innovation in commercialization and distribution channels are very important, as well as us as individuals trying to buy local from our local farmers and small businesses is also paramount. So that's my take and my opinion on this point.
Thank you, Savannah. I will pose the same question to you. What can we do as individuals or organizations to help safeguard food security during this time of crisis?
Well, from experience, especially around this COVID-19 pandemic period, I believe to ensure food security, there has to be that conscious effort in building community around the right to food for everyone, in spite of the fact that there are people who might not be able to afford food. But we know in the conventions that right to food is a basic universal human right. It demands that there must be a conscious responsibility within communities to ensure that our food system becomes favorable, not just to those who can afford, but everyone, whether people can afford food or not. And how are we able to do so? By creating initiatives like the food banking systems. And as well, in my opening remarks, I was going to talk about the fact that creating partnerships also help in ensuring food security, especially in this COVID pandemic period. For instance, we've been able to create partnership with private sector and other NGOs, which has led us to distribute over 7,000 food boxes and over 200,000 hot meals to vulnerable people in society. Some of this partnership has been with global organizations like United Way Worldwide and United Way Ghana as well as private sector, and then global food banking network. One other key thing that we need to do to ensure food security, especially in times like this, is through the sharing of know-how in terms of technical support within communities. It's quite key, especially in times like this where volunteering within community organizations are quite on the low. It dwells on bigger organizations to provide technical know-how to ensure efficiency. For instance, we are working with a private sector organization company with a large staff strength and technical know-how due to the COVID pandemic, and for the rapid increase in the service we provide. This company is providing us with the know-how in terms of how to handle large food products at a certain point in time and how to utilize logistics available to distribute large quantities of food within efficiently. So these are some of the things we can do, especially in a continent like Africa, where we know inefficiencies within our food supply chain is quite huge. These are some of the things we can do to ensure food security.
Thank you very much, Elijah, for those insights. Emily?
Yeah, thank you. I just have a couple thoughts here. To listen to people on the ground experiencing the difficulties in order to create solutions, and continue looking at root cause and how hunger and food insecurity intersects with other social issues. Something a little more practical, I think, supporting local agriculture. And if you know someone, or if you're interested in doing a food drive or supporting a local food pantry, connect with those organizations prior to starting the collection to understand exactly what they need. There are organizations that serve target populations. For example, there's pantries that serve seniors, that serve the immigrant community, and different populations that have different needs. So might have a need for protein, and others might have a need for certain vegetables and things like that. So just checking in with those organizations prior to doing some sort of food drive, those are very practical steps that can be taken.
Thank you all very much. I have one question from the audience here, which delves into your motivation for going into this. You said, what interested you in working in this space, and what advice will you give to young people who are interested in working in this space? Any of you can take it.
Well, for me, my passion for food was served as a motivation, and as well served as inspiration towards creating efficient and sustainable means of nutrition for low-income families, especially at a point in my career as a chef, having to come into contact with a mentally challenged man picking leftover foods from the restaurant where I work, and then going onto the street to feed vulnerable people. I felt as a chef, I found myself at a point where I could contribute towards bringing change using food as a catalyst. And that has been my motivation.
Any advice for young people that are interested in pursuing a similar path?
Yes, especially in Africa, I would advise that when you have a passion, especially within, there are so many opportunities which people often see as challenges in the agriculture food sector. And most often than not, we have left this sector for foreigners or people who are not originally from Ghana or from Africa to be the main drivers of that sector. And it is about time that young people can see the challenges within our agriculture and food sector as opportunities, and then leverage on technology to ensure that they create opportunities through these challenges.
Thank you. I'll let Savannah also respond to that. And then Emily, let's please keep our responses short because we are running out of time.
Okay, what interested me to work in these kind of spaces is that when I was working with farmers before going to grad school, I realized that the focus was mostly on productivity, on the production of food, but it was many times forgotten that it's also necessary to grow food that is environmentally good, nutritious, and the distribution of food that farmers need to have also access to good and environmentally friendly practices and access to markets and to the consumer. So that's what inspired me to try to reach and connect farmers and consumers. And I myself learned from their traditions and their point of view and developing strategies and projects that aligned with farmers and communities viewpoints. And from, in my opinion, an advice that I can give to young people who want to work, for instance, with farmers and rural communities is to be open to interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, because you're gonna need to have an holistic point of view of things, because not everything is just like the economic side or the productivity side. You have to know that their livelihoods is intertwined with with everything from the land, from the market, their communities. So that's my advice, to try to teach yourself on many aspects, and to be always open to new points of view and to learn what the community wants and how they see the world.
Good. Interdisciplinarity and systems thinking. Emily?
Yeah, thank you. So what interested me about working in the food security space is just how relational and communal food is. And in terms of just building those relationships and community and understanding. And I think it's a beautiful space to begin looking at social issues. I think in terms of advice, I would just say start by engaging with local agriculture, whether that be through your purchasing or volunteering, or if you have curiosity and want to get involved further, connecting with them and finding out what those opportunities might be.
Thank you very much. It's certainly been a very enriching discussion, and we thank our panelists for all those insights. And in terms of what you and I can do, I'll just mention a few things. Changing our shopping habits to make sure that food does not go to waste. Reflecting and advocating for more democratic food system. Buying local to support small businesses. Build community around the idea that food is a right. It's a basic human right that everyone has access to food, and that the economic status should not determine food that they receive. Creating partnership with each other to advocate for that basic right to food. knowledge sharing, especially technical capacity, that will ensure that those that are operating within the agri food value chain are actually operating in a more efficient, in a more efficient manner, and then listening to those who are directly affected by some of these crises as we come up with new solutions. These are really insightful, and we want to thank our panelists for all the work, for giving us their time and allowing us to benefit from their knowledge and experience. I will turn it over to Chinwe, who will close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame, and thank you to all our panelists, Professor Shirley, Emily, Silvana, Elijah, and of course you, Kwame. Also, we, on behalf of the Office of International Studies and Programs and the Global Youth Advancement Network, I really want to appreciate all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your experiences with us and to help us identify where the gaps are and how we can contribute as individuals and as a community to reducing hunger and poverty in our local communities and around the world. I also want to use this opportunity to thank the GYAN staff for contributing in so many different ways to this inaugural webinar. I want to especially thank Elizabeth, our project and admin assistant, for all her hard work in coordinating the speakers, developing the marketing material and social media posts, and managing the logistics for today. Our next webinar will be held in mid-February, and you will be receiving information about this session in the coming weeks. Once again, thank you for participating in this inaugural webinar. We look forward to more vibrant discussions with you. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you all. And I think Alberto has a question and I replied to him in the chat. So just wanted to say that, and very nice to meet you all. I hope to see you again.
Thank you, Savannah. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our audience for participating.